What is the oldest recorded vampire legend?
Ooh, again, I'm trying to think back to Bram's journals because he found, and what was fascinating about this, like he started writing Dracula, the actual book, when he was 43. He started researching vampires back when he was a teenager. We found notes all the way back to when he was 16 years old that he had made in some books at Marsh's Library in Dublin. But he had actually found, and this is what I thought was cool, like almost every culture on the planet has a vampire legend or lore in their culture. And a lot of those existed long before we hopped into boats and actually started talking to each other. And his general thinking was that means there is some truth to all of it. You know, like it may not necessarily be a vampire, but there is something like that inspired that throughout history. He was so into it, he actually had himself cremated when he died just to protect his immortal soul from vampires at a time in history when people didn't get cremated. So I think it goes back almost to the beginning of time. And I think if you trace back any of these, werewolves, vampires, ghosts, whatever it might be, you're going to find them in literally every culture around the planet, which is probably the most fascinating piece of that. Like, what is it all actually based on?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Writers Drinking Whiskey, your literary happy hour, the show where we may explore the darkness, but we will never forsake you or a nice bottle of amber gold. I am your host, William R. Hincy, and I am really delighted and honored today to have author extraordinaire J.D. Barker. J.D., welcome to the show.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. So I'm watching. I don't know if your viewers can see your setup. Do you do audio and video?
It's mostly video. It's mostly YouTube. That's where the show
Gotcha.
Goes.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, because I'm actually building a room above my garage with a bar in it. So I'm going to have to get some pictures of what you got going on there and use that send it off to my designer. But anyway, I'm doing great. Happy Monday.
Yeah, happy Monday. And I'll have to say, I'm even set up because we celebrate Chinese New Year's in the house. So we even have I don't know if you can see the red back there is the little Chinese kind of bulb lights and everything. So
I'm guessing there is a lot of celebrating in your house with a room like that.
There is a lot of random happy hours is kind of the theme around here. Awesome. So let me give you kind of I like to call it instead of cliff notes, the whiskey notes, because I'm super creative and everything's just alcohol themed around here. So let me give you the whiskey notes version of a bio. So you're a New York Times international bestseller. Some of the notable books, there's Forsaken, which I was made a play on in the opening there. There's Dracula, Confessions of the Dead with James Patterson. The newest one, I think, is, from what I could tell on your website, is The Lies We Tell. Is that the newest one, or is there a newer book coming out?
That one's actually later this year. So writing with James Patterson, I kind of caught the co-author bug, and I've got a bunch of books coming out. My next solo title is called Something I Keep Upstairs, and that one releases in May. I've got another one with James Patterson coming out this March, so a little over a month from now, called The Writer. And actually tomorrow I've got one coming out called We Don't Talk About Emma, which is sitting on the shelf behind me.
Oh wow. Very cool. Very cool. That's
busy guy.
Yes, yeah, I can tell. Awesome. And so where I like to start us, just to place us in the world, is like, where are you at in the world and what's the best place to get a drink there?
So I live on a little island off the coast of Portsmouth in New Hampshire in New England. It's called Newcastle. We don't have any, I'm trying to think, we've got a tiny little cafe. I don't think they serve alcohol. They've got ice cream if you want to go there. Sure. But anyway, if you want an actual drink, you've got to head into town. I've got a 7-year-old, so I honestly could not tell you the best place to get a drink nearby. If you need to know how far it is to the nearest trampoline park, I could rattle that off in a heartbeat.
Well, sure. I know those times well. There is when you have, because we have 4 kids, so we've gone through. So okay. We have grandkids. So wow, we have all the way to grandkids, like young grandkids, and our son, me and my wife's son, is 13 now, so he starts high school next year. So this is the first time since in forever, in 20 some odd years, we haven't had a little one directly in the house. Well, the grandkids come over and hang out all the time, so I still know where the trampoline parks and parks are, but I can feel the going out to the bar. I always say, if anyone asks me, I point them to the nice restaurants that also have good drinks now.
Yeah, that's a good way to go. It's crazy how that impacts your life. Like, I could probably rattle off every Taylor Swift song at this point, but I would never listen to, it completely takes you over.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So what I'd like to start is maybe just a notch before the writing career started. So I always joke that I'm like Oz on the show. If there was a curtain, I'm just always pulling it off, and I'm like, it's me behind me. I'm Oz. I could never have the big face over there. So I just stalk websites beforehand and get some details that seem interesting. And I know, so you had your business degree. but you ended up going into, I think it was the 25th Parallel magazine, if I noted it down right. And then that kind of transitioned to interviewing, like pop culture kind of interviews and things. So like for like 17 and Teen Beat and such. So I wonder if maybe you could like just tell us about that time of your life a little bit, like where, if you ever imagined you would end up where you are now, like kind of what that time period was.
Yeah, so from a time period, this was early 90s. I graduated high school in 1989. I've been writing pretty much my entire life. My parents encouraged it, but they also added the caveat, writing is a fantastic hobby, but you can't make a living at it. You have to get a day job. So, you know, it was just always that thing I did to keep my head on straight. But, you know, I went to college. I got a business degree, another one in finance. I've got a degree in IT. I got halfway through a psychology degree and then ended up working in the corporate world. But, you know, I would always come home and write at night. So when I was in college, I started writing for a lot of newspapers and magazines, interviewing celebrities. 25th Parallel was kind of a unique thing that sort of dropped into my lap. I had written a paper about the Berlin Wall coming down. And I don't know if you're probably not old enough to remember this, but a bunch of rock bands got on a plane, Bon Jovi, Skid Row, these guys, and they went over to Moscow to perform a concert like right after this happened. So I wrote a paper about all that happening for my English class in college. I didn't expect anything to come of it, but you know, my teachers had always encouraged me to you know, follow the writing thing. And she sent it off to somebody, a guy named Paul Galato, who was the editor of Circus magazine. And I got a phone call from him, and he told me that, you know, he wasn't looking for it for Circus, but he was starting a new magazine called 25th Parallel in South Florida, which is where I happened to be, and asked if I would write with them. And I jumped on that. I wanted, you know, it was basically my entry point. One of the guys I worked with was a guy named Brian Warner, who later turned out to be Marilyn Manson. You know, so like, this was at the beginning of that whole thing too. Sure. But, you know, like I would write for all these newspapers and magazines. I would do that while I was up, you know, while I was in school. Then when I got out of school, I got into the corporate world, and I would come home and I would write at night to basically stay sane. So I was always doing both.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. I used to tell people I did a lot of my writing on my commutes. As I was driving around, and my mind would just be teeming with it, and I'd have little notebooks. This was probably I probably could have made audio notes at the time, but it wasn't like something people did regularly, right? There wasn't Bluetooth on the car and things. So there was a lot of just writing things down just to stay sane, I think, more than anything else. So I can appreciate that completely.
It's hard to explain that to somebody who's not a writer, because like I literally get antsy. I get jumpy if I don't write at least once a day. You see, so we all do it. And like I run into so many people, and they tell me, I want to write a book. And my answer is, well, why haven't you written a book? You know, like get to it. And like, because I could not write a book, you know, like I could not like stop. And like, I wrote on my wedding day. Like I'm that bad. You know, it's like, I have to, I mean, other people, you know, like I've got friends who go off and play golf. Like that's how they, you know, get their head on straight. Like for me, it's always been writing.
Right. Very cool. I wonder then, so when you're interviewing people, what is the worst question you ever asked someone? Or what's like was there any ever question you asked that like completely backfired, or like, you know, or you thought like right after you asked it, like, why in the world did I just ask that?
I think from my standpoint, the question I get all the time is like, where do your ideas come from? And like that one always, yeah, I don't know why, but like it just, because I don't know where they come from. So like, I don't have an answer. Like, I feel like I should have an answer. My biggest flub, but again, this is really going to date me, but the very first interview that I went on was for Davy Jones from the Monkees. I don't know if you remember Davy Jones, but like you know, the Monkees were very, very popular when they came up, to the point where they had a cartoon, they had TV shows going on, but they only had like a handful of hits. And Davy Jones was in Miami, and he was performing Oliver. And you know, he was very proud of the fact that he was doing something that wasn't Monkees related. And while I was talking to him, like we were basically at it in like a pre-show for the thing, and people were coming up to him, and like literally everybody asked him to play Daydream Believer. Like there was a piano off to the side. They're like, at some point, are you going to go over there and maybe play? Because that was like their big hit. And you know, like he would turn to him and he would smile. And he's like, yeah, I would love to do that. Absolutely. The second they were gone, he was like, I hate that fucking song. and you know, like that was like my first real glimpse of celebrity, because I saw both sides of this particular guy. You know, like he knew he was going to spend the rest of his life playing this song. He always had to play it as if it was the very first time he did it, and he was like completely into it. But he hated the fact that his life was based around that. He's kind of caught in a bubble. And like I carried that with me whenever I interviewed celebrities, because most of the interviews I did back then were musicians. And I kind of got the same vibe from all of them, and like it takes a very special person to get up on stage night after night after night and play that same song, for 20 some years and make it come off the way that they do. So I've always tried to be cognizant of that kind of thing and try to dig a little deeper, like the persona that we see, on television and social media. That's not necessarily the person that they really are. So I always try to get to that actual person.
Right. That's funny you say that, because and I'm sure you've done a billion more podcasts than I have, but I was doing a few, and the inspiration question, and it's part of the reason I started this show. I was like, I like the conversations I have with writers, like at a conference, like at the bar after, or, just like when you're out and about and you're just chatting and then getting to know each other and then talking. And it's just like people at work, right? You end up talking about story and things like that kind of naturally, but it's not where do you get your ideas?
If you're watching Writers Drinking Whiskey, you are taking part in the meaning economy. And I mean that sincerely, even if my voice kind of has an ironic tone. And to that end, I will be releasing my most ambitious novel yet, Pirates of Appalachia, as a weekly serial on Substack. Pirates has everything you're looking for in a novel. It has adventure, it has pirates, it has hostile corporate takeovers, prophecy, love, longing for belonging, heroes, villains, psychedelic shenanigans of the highest order. It holds a funhouse mirror to society and reflects it onto this quasi near future that I know you're all going to love and just kind of be enchanted and horrified by. Think 1984 with the Funny Bone. Kurt Vonnegut, if you found him drooling in an alley after a 3-night bender. Twain, if you replace that badass mustache with an eye patch and negligee. And rest assured, no sensitivity readers were injured in the making of Pirates of Appalachia. So please check out Substack. It's meeting the market needs by connecting readers directly with today's very best storytellers. We're just skipping the corporate kind of media apparatus and the endless scrolls on Amazon or Instagram or whatever else. You can get directly to creators on there, get a taste for their work, and then follow along the people that you love. Thanks so much for tuning in. And now let's get back to your regularly scheduled programming.
One of the things I did want to talk to you about, because looking at your bio, right, that you did some ghost writing to start off, some established IP, right? Or like with the Dracula, taking that back. And then you do a lot of the co-writing, like you had mentioned earlier. So one of the questions I've thought about a lot recently, especially with all the AI advancements that everyone kind of freaks out about and things, is how do you see kind of the future of writing going? Like the future of the written book form going? Is it kind of status quo and it'll just keep rolling, or is it going to be a lot more collabs? I don't know if you ever met, you're both one degree of separation from James Patterson. I had on Pure Graph, who it's like a middle school mystery, co-writes with James Patterson and things. So I've had on a bunch of writers that have gone into the collaboration kind of mode. So anyways, a long like preamble here to ask the question, like kind of where do you see the next 10 years? Where do you see the kind of future of writing going?
Yes, I've been watching all of this stuff very closely. In my world, like I try to take a step back. Like I'm an author, but I'm selling books. I'm selling a product. I'm selling a widget. So I try to approach it from that standpoint. If I need to sell a widget, what's the best way to get in front of people? In this world, at least for me, it's all about branding. If I walk into a bookstore, like one of the first things I notice is the household names, the people that their name is nice and big on the cover. Like Stephen King has a new book coming out. Like you're going to see Stephen King. The title is going to be this tiny little thing down at the bottom. You don't care because the brand. You know what you're getting. It's no different than walking in a grocery store and recognizing a particular brand. So from my standpoint, that's what I'm trying to build, that household name, recognition of the brand itself. And I'm doing that in a lot of different ways. My name is actually trademarked at this point. So I have full control over how it appears on my various covers, which is huge. Like I actually license it back to the publisher. So if a publisher wants to put my name on the cover of a book I wrote, they actually have to pay me to put my name on the cover, and I get to dictate exactly how it appears. So I get to control all of that. I'm doing a lot of co-authored projects, like you mentioned. I try to do a couple high-profile projects, at any given moment. Dracula cool, was very high profile, basically wrote a prequel to Dracula using Bram Stoker's original notes, got a ton of press. We got a film deal out of it. So I always try to keep something like that going at any given time. I'm currently rebooting a film franchise called Flatliners from the 90s. I don't know if you remember that movie with Kevin Bacon and Kiefer Sutherland. Yeah, so I'm writing a book to reboot that franchise, which again is another one to just kind of generate press. It creates word of mouth, gets people just kind of talking about brand. So I've got that going on. And then I'm also doing a lot of co-authored projects. And I think a lot of that came from two different things. I spent so many years working as a ghostwriter and a book doctor, basically collaborating with other people. When I started writing my own books, and it felt very solitary. I missed having that other voice in the room. Then I started writing with Patterson, and it really reignited that. So I've been seeking co-authors out to basically start. I've got my own imprint with Simon & Schuster, and I've been trying to create co-author titles for that imprint. So I find people that basically can bring something to the book that I can't do. So in this particular case, we don't talk about Emma. I wrote it with a guy named E.G. Feindorf, who lives in New Orleans. He knows the city inside and out. He knows the people. He knows the streets. And New Orleans is almost like a character by itself if you do it right in a book. And I could fake my way through it. I could do a bunch of Google searches. I can research it, and I can, come up with something convincing. But having somebody with an authentic voice in the writing room, like you just can't beat that. So I do a lot of co-author projects. So, not only does it, allow me to work with other people, but it increases the number of books that I have coming out, which again, from a branding standpoint is important. The more often you're out there in front of people, the more often they see your name, the more likely they are to recognize it. AI is a weird thing. I mean, nobody really knows where it's going at this point. I've played with all of them. ChatGPT is on my phone. My favorite one is Claude at this point, because it seems to get just a little smarter. It's almost like ChatGPT's smarter cousin or something. I've used that one quite a bit. But, the truth is, like I can't brainstorm with it because it's literally like you're talking to an encyclopedia. Like it can only regurgitate what it's already been taught, what's already been done before. And when you're writing thrillers, like you don't want what's been done before. So for an AI, like 1 + 1 always equals 2. When you're writing a thriller, you need 1 + 1 to equal 3. It's got to take that reader in some direction they don't understand. I've never gotten that out of an AI. Like if I get on the phone and brainstorm an idea with James Patterson, he comes up with some crazy stuff out of left field. Like I need it for me to use an AI. Like it needs to do that. And at some point it might, have a creative thought. And all of a sudden we're going to go down some, new rabbit hole. That could be a year away. I mean, judging by how fast this technology is changing, but it's not there yet. And I think most people, like they buy my books, they buy those other, well-known authors, they buy them because of the voice, like that particular voice grabs them. They like that voice and they keep going back to it. So even if people start producing AI books, 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 of them a day, like it doesn't matter to me because my readers are going to come back for that brand, for that voice, and they're going to keep coming back to me. Now, this doesn't mean an AI couldn't develop a voice of its own, but I don't think it's ever going to be capable of duplicating my voice or somebody else's voice. I had this conversation with somebody a couple days ago. Like if you wanted to teach an AI to write like Stephen King, the general thinking out there is, well, you take every book Stephen King's written, you dump it in the AI, and now it can write like Stephen King. That's actually not true. You would have to actually take every life experience that Stephen King has had and feed that into the AI. And then maybe you might get something that's relatively close because now it has the inspiration behind those books, but it's still never going to be Stephen King. Sure. So I don't see AIs being able to compete on that level.
Right. Well, and it's never we feel like we're stagnant, but we're not, right? As people, we change as we go, as we move through life, we develop a lot. You see it a lot, like from a kid to an adult, right? But even 20 to 30, like as you go. And I saw there was a study that actually said they were asking everyone at 30, how much different do you think you'll be at 40? And they would go, I don't think very much. And they would ask at 40, how much different are you than 30? They go, it was a lot, actually. I'm a lot different. And the researchers actually thought as I got older that might change, but they said that same pattern continued to 60. I might be messing up the years, but 60 to 70, it was about a 10-year kind of increment. So even if AI captured that moment in time, you don't exist in a moment of time, as a writer. So I do think it's interesting. So you have Claude and things on your phone, because the way I tend to think of AI is, and maybe because I grew up with Star Wars and things like this, it's like your C-3PO, right? It's like, you translate this. Oh, hey, I want to research this, like I was writing a character that was doing some taxidermy and I don't know much about it. So I was able to Perplexity was the one I ended up using, but what are the basic steps? What tools do you need? And it's able to give you a bunch. And it gives you links to videos and things. So it's almost just like 1,000 times better Google, it's like it's just going more. But
Yeah, I mean, I use it for a bunch of like I don't see myself ever using it on the creative front. I like sitting in front of my computer. I like coming up with the ideas. Typing a paragraph, deleting that paragraph when it doesn't work, replacing it with something else. I like that process. And for me to like lean over and ask Claude a question and try to get it, like that doesn't work. But I've used it to create like the text for the back of the book, for Facebook ads, creating compelling lines for a Facebook ad. I needed to generate a press release the other day. I just grabbed a bunch of paragraphs of things that I knew needed to be in that press release. Claude, create a press release based on all this stuff. And it, it shoots something back out that, isn't perfect, but, it just saved me 20 minutes of writing. And then I just fine tune it and I can kick it out. So I think it's good for stuff like that. One of the other things I've been using it for very heavily lately, I do a lot of translations. I'm in 150 different countries, about 30 different languages. And at this point, a lot of translators or people are trying to jump on the translation bandwagon by using AI. And you have to weed that out because AI translations really aren't that good. They're not there yet. Like you could use it probably for a first pass, but you still need a human to go back through and clean it up. So when I get a translation proposal from somebody, I will take that text, drop it into Claude, give Claude the original text and say, was this done by an AI or by a person? And it'll give me a detailed response to that. It'll tell me if it was a human, this is why. If it was AI, this is why. If it's a combination of both, it can tell because you're basically asking it, did you translate this? Because they're all using the same engines. So it's able to figure it out. So from that standpoint, it's good. So it's a useful time saver. It's a good tool. I see it no different than, a grammar checker in Microsoft Word. That saved me a boatload of, like I don't have to reach back to my dictionary anymore. And back in the day, I used to have to do that, to figure out how to spell something. Takes me out of the story for 20, 30 seconds. That's 20, 30 seconds I now have back. So if it can save me time, I'm there for it.
Clickety clack, clickety clack, clickety clack. Bing. Oh, hello. You caught me right as I was putting the finishing touches on my epic absurdist satire, Pirates of Appalachia. And now it is time for the long road to publication and the long editing process. As writers, we spend tons of time editing our work. The hardest part, I think, of the editing process is really like the proofreading, the copy editing, because you were so immersed in it. I've just spent 13 years immersed in Pirates, got it all together, went through, edited it front and back, by characters, all these different asymmetrical ways, and still it's going to have typos in it. And they're going to horrify me one day if I ever find those in the actual printed edition. The way I combat that is with Edit GPT. You found today's sponsor. The link is on the screen now. I'm going to put it here. Here's the link. If you're on the podcast forum and you can't see me pointing up at that link, if you're on a podcast, you're really missing out. I'm really animated with my hands. But if you can't find it on there, feel free. You'll find it in the description. It helps support the show, helps restock the bar, helps keep this guy happy so that we can keep putting all these shows out there for all of you. Thanks for everything. Let's get back to the writing because Pirates of Appalachia is not going to finish itself. The one thing Edit GPT cannot do is save the file for you. So I'm going to make sure to save that now. So I want to get back to my work. You get back to your regularly scheduled programming. And speaking of AI, I actually had the AI give me a question for today. So I use it actually for the show for like SEO and things, right? Like it's like that's search engine optimization is the computer language anyway. So I'm like, here, look at the transcript of the show. What term should I use in the description or the tags on YouTube or whatever it might be? So knowing I was going to ask you this, I thought it'd be funny just to ask. I think this was Chat GPT a question. I said ask JD Barker a question. And I put some parameters, but so let's see how it did. So you've collaborated with literary legends like James Patterson and written solo works with distinct voices. Have you ever found yourself unintentionally adopting another writer's style or habits after working closely with them? And if so, how did you recalibrate to stay true to your own voice?
Well, that's actually a very insightful question. So there's two things I got to put out there. I'm autistic. I've got a form of autism called Asperger's, and I was diagnosed back in my 20s. One of the things that it allows me to do is mimic other authors. And I learned about this after the fact. But if you put text in front of me, written by somebody else, I can basically pick up on their vocabulary, their cadence, their writing style, and I can continue writing that in their voice, which is one of the reasons why I was sought after as a ghostwriter, because I could basically pick up where somebody left off. I did a lot of memoirs memoirs where I would have to, interview a politician, and then I would have to write a book in first person from, a female politician's point of view. I was able to do that. But ChatGPT is right. Like if I'm working on a project like that, and then all of a sudden I got to flip that switch and work on something of my own, you have to go back to your own voice. I've gotten better at being able to do that. I think the most difficult time I've ever had with that is when I was working on Dracula, because, this was Bram Stoker. This was, English from the 1900s, so I would get caught up in that world. And at the same time, I was writing a serial killer series that takes place in Chicago. It was very difficult to not have one world creep into the other world. So, that happened. But, I've been lucky, like as a solo author, even when I work with James Patterson, he doesn't ask for me to duplicate his voice because he knows I could do that. He wants my voice in there with his voice. So it's a little different.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you for that. And thank you, Robot Overlords, for the question. What do you think? Because I think it was Forsaken you published it first as an indie title, right? And I think it got picked up later. What do you think, like, with as far as like moving away from the AI part of it, just the publishing part, right? With the like plethora of indie writers now, publishing houses I think having a harder and harder time kind of just besides like kind of the top notch people, right? A lot of the mid card and things have a harder time kind of finding. There's all the noise, right? There's just so much titles, all the noise, finding the signal it's end up being what's hard. How do you see that going? Or any thoughts? Do you think it's just going to be kind of status quo, or?
No, I mean, it's always changing. I just had my 10-year anniversary as a full-time author, and Forsaken, you mentioned I indie published that mainly because I when I went to query agents, I did it all wrong. I used a form letter. I didn't look at their website to see what they were looking for, but I completely flubbed the process, and I ended up indie publishing the book, but it sold a lot of copies. And because of that, I fell on the radar of the traditional guys. So when my next book was ready, The Fourth Monkey, we had no trouble selling that to a traditional publisher. I went to HMH, which is now part of HarperCollins. I ended up with a 7-figure deal when the dust settled, with a TV show and a film attached to it. So I basically went from one camp, the indie camp, to the traditional camp. But because I got a taste of being an indie, I think it sort of tainted my view, because as an indie, you have total control over everything. You pick your cover, your title, your marketing, like everything is 100% on you. And when you're in the traditional world, it's the exact opposite. You send that book off to your agent, they send it off to the editor, and they can change anything. Like, you've got no control over any of that stuff. If you don't like your cover, like I've got a clause in my contract that says I can basically tell them not to use it, but then they'll, point their finger at me if it doesn't sell and say, but if we would have went with that original cover that you made us change, so like I don't bother to even do that. But, so I saw both worlds, and it's an extreme difference, and the financial implications are very different. As an indie author, you make about 70 cents on the dollar. On the traditional side, you may get a big advance check, but you have to pay that money back, and you're paying it back in small little increments, like 15 or 20 cents on the dollar. So you have to sell a lot more copies in order to make the same amount of money. So those kind of thoughts went through my head for the next couple of books that I published in the traditional world. Like, what would have happened if I had published it as an indie? Because I sold a lot. Like, I didn't necessarily need the traditional publisher, but they were able to get me into places that I couldn't get to as an indie, like airport bookstores and, box stores and, Target, Walmart, those kind of things. But after a while, the financial implications, I got 4 or 5 books in, I couldn't turn my back on it anymore. So I called up my agent. I wrote a book called The Caller's Game. And I told her, listen, I'm going to publish this in English in all the English territories. You can go ahead and sell it to all the foreign territories like you normally do. And we ended up doing that. It was basically a hybrid approach. So I retained English rights and did all that. She sold it into all the foreign countries. Traditional publishers picked it up on that front. And I really liked that because it allowed me to keep that control, where I wanted to have it. I didn't have to deal with translations, which is a real pain in the butt if you don't really know what you're doing, especially in a foreign market. So that worked out really well for a while. About a year and a half ago, I wrote a book called Behind a Closed Door. I sent it off to my agent at Writer's House. He started shopping it. And, it was basically like all of my contracts required me to do that. So like, even though I wanted to indie publish the book, I was required to give it to my agent. He had to get a deal on the table, and then I could say no to that deal and I could still publish it, but I had to give my agent the chance to do that. So he started shopping it. While I was making the rounds in New York, we started getting film and TV offers from the folks in Hollywood, and we ended up signing a film option for it. And that, lit a spark under to the publisher. So the book, like all of a sudden everybody wanted it, and it was going to auction. Basically meaning I think there were 4 or 5 publishing houses that wanted the book at the same time, and there was going to be an auction. They were going to bid. I got a phone call from a friend of mine who worked at Random House, and she said, listen, we're about to offer on your book, and when that comes in, you need to turn it down. And I asked her why, and she said, well, we're about to lay off a bunch of people, and the editor who wants your book is on that list. And if you ever had a book with an editor who, loses their job, that book can end up in limbo forever at that publishing house, depending on your contract. So that caused me to back away. And, I had worked in the finance world for 2 decades. I basically took a step back, and I decided it's time to make another change. So I reached out to the people who had bought Simon & Schuster. It had recently been bought by a private equity firm. We started some conversations, and ultimately I ended up creating my own imprint at Simon & Schuster. But, the ultimate deal is, I can put out basically whatever I want, whenever I want, but Simon & Schuster handles the heavy lifting. They handle my print sales and distribution, which means I can act as an indie. I still make the financial, I've got the financial windfall of being an indie, but I've got Simon & Schuster handling the backside. So I've got the best of both worlds. So my indie published titles essentially end up in those places that I couldn't get to before. And that's what I'm doing today. And I really see that as the next logical step of all of this, because if you think about it, you find some indie author who's doing really well. The publishers know that. They watch that stuff very closely. They watch the Amazon bestseller list. They know who's on top. They'll go to that author and say, we will give you $1 million for your next book. And that indie author is going to say, well, I can make $1 million in 3 or 4 months if I put it out on my own. I don't need that. I don't need the headache of it. And they're going to walk away. But you flip that a little bit, you give them a deal similar to what I have. All of a sudden, they're making money as an author. They're making money as a publisher. They still have all of that control, and they have the publishing house behind them doing the heavy lifting. That all of a sudden makes sense for both sides. So I can see a lot of big name indie authors signing deals similar to this. And from the publishing house standpoint, the top 5, I can see them doing a lot more of these deals because they can, now capture the people that are actually selling books. So I think in the next couple of years, you're going to see a lot more of these.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. I wonder then, so moving to, and thanks so much for that. It's great insight on the publishing industry there. Moving to you as a writer a little bit here. So I wonder, like with the thrillers, and I know there's like some horror themes. I had some notes of the different things, but you can see from just the books we've talked about a little, a lot of times with thrillers, with horror, there's that notion of, it's almost like a modern Greek tragedy. Right, like there's that catharsis. You. It's not like it's so great to like see these horrible things happen or to be scared, but you get to do it from a safe place and kind of get that cathartic experience out of it. Do you get that when you're writing it? Is there a bit for you that you get to dump whatever you might be feeling into the book and get some degree of catharsis out of writing it, or is it? I know you said you feel like you have to write, right? You have to write daily. Is there?
Yeah. It's a weird thing. Like I've tried to describe the process before. Like if everything is firing on all cylinders, I feel like the book is playing out like a movie in my head, and I'm literally just writing down what I see happen. The characters, I spend a lot of time developing my characters. They are real people to me by the time I write that first sentence. And because of that, I can take a real person and drop them into a scenario, and I know how they're going to react. And like they're going to react differently than somebody else would, and somebody else wouldn't react differently from those two. So they have to be real. So I think that's the driving factor behind all of it. And a lot of it does come down to emotions. Like I don't like killing some of my characters, but sometimes they need to die. But I think one of the reasons why I really got into this and why I like horror in general, when I was 8 years old, I picked up a copy of Dracula at a yard sale. My mom owned an antique store, so we used to hit yard sales all the time. And there was a box of books. They were like 25 cents each, and Dracula was sitting up on top. I was 8 years old and I picked it up, and like the cover was scary, and like I had never read anything like that before. And I thought of it as an adult book, because up until that point I had read stuff like Hardy Boys and Nancy Drews and Charles Dickens and a lot of the classics. But like Dracula looked like something my parents should be reading. My mom let me buy it, and I took it home, and like it scared the bejesus out of me. Like I finished that book, and like I had to leave the lights on for like a couple of weeks after reading that. And like the fact that a book could bring out that kind of emotional response in me, I think I've been chasing that the rest of my adult life, trying to recreate that kind of feel on paper. With my latest book, Something I Keep Upstairs, I took 4 years to write that book, and mainly because there were parts in it that's freaked me out to the point where like I had to put it aside for a little while, kind of push it across my desk. Like that happened a lot when I was writing the 4MK series too, like there's serial killers and like, a lot of nasty stuff going on. And like I would write something and like, just push my laptop away. Like, I can't believe that just came out of my head, so, but like, those are the moments that the readers really enjoy because they're authentic, they're real, and they just grab you. So like, I'm always chasing that.
Right. Sure. And so and then how, so when you're writing, darkness that, to some degree, you're kind of channeling that into your work. You're at that kind of mental movie kind of state. Do you ever have a hard time detaching from that? Right. Cause you have to, like, you mentioned you have a, 7-year-old and things, and so you have to kind of return to the light to some degree, right? You need to kind of detach from that, and then, be a happy father and it's for your son and your family, generally. Do you ever have a hard time kind of with that detachment, or how do you go about making sure you can kind of make that, swap over?
Yeah, like when I finished the 4MK series, like, it was extremely dark, very dark thriller, but people like that. But like, I wrote it, I started it at a time when I didn't have a daughter, I didn't have any kids. There's a lot of scenes in that book I don't think I could write today having a child. Sure. So that changed. But when I finished it, like, I felt like I needed to kind of clear out my mental space. And I wrote a book called She Has a Broken Thing Where Her Heart Should Be, which is basically my retelling of Great Expectations in modern times. And, like, I did that basically just to kind of get all of that out of my head. I've gotten better at it. I do a lot of like weird stuff to get myself into a writer space. Like, I listen to a thunderstorm soundtrack on noise canceling headphones, basically white noise, every time I write. And I've done that, going, like, I couldn't even tell you when I started, but it's a Pavlov's dog thing. Like, as soon as I hear that noise, my brain goes, oh, okay, we're writing now. And, I immediately jump into that mode. And the same thing happens when I turn those headphones off or I take them off. All of a sudden that sound is gone. My brain switches off and, I can go on. But, like, because the characters are real to me, like, a lot of times, like, I feel like they're sitting there waiting on me. It's almost like they're just standing there tapping their foot going, hey, remember where you left us? Like, you need to wrap this up, so like, I can only step away for so long. But I try to put an end to it. My business day ends at 3:00, and the rest of the day I spend with family. So I try to draw a line there.
Very good. Awesome. And so, and for the sake of time here, I think we need to move on to our shots portion. So rapid fire questions here. So first response. So, and I like to start with some trivia here. So knowing that you co-authored the Dracula book, I wanted to ask you some questions about vampires and Dracula in general. So first question here. So why do vampires traditionally fear garlic?
I honestly don't know, but like, that was in, like, Bram Stoker, when he researched Dracula, he had a list in his journal of traits for vampires, and garlic is on there. And he actually found it, I forget what country he found it in, but it popped up. Like, he researched vampires literally all around the world, every culture, and he had notes on it, and garlic was in there. Why they do, I don't know.
Right. Well, so according to Perplexity AI, folklore suggests garlic's strong scent repels evil spirits. It's an old folklore thing that the strong scent of garlic expels like evil spirits, supernatural creatures. And then I think this is why in Italy there's no vampires. There's just lots of garlic in the cooking. You don't have to worry about it. So Bram Stoker and Anne Rice meet at a bar. What do they order?
Ooh, trying to remember what Bram used to drink. There was a lot of wine in his journals, him and his brothers. So if I had to guess, they'd probably go back to that. Maybe some Irish whiskey, so maybe some Jameson.
Yeah, remember some Jameson? Okay. I was thinking, because they're both vampire writers, Bloody Marys. So
that would be the go-to, but I don't know if a Bloody Mary existed back in Bram Stoker's time.
I don't know. I mentioned, I think before the show, I'm a dad of 4, so I have the dad jokes for days. What is the oldest recorded vampire legend?
Ooh, again, I'm trying to think back to Bram's journals, because he found, and what was fascinating about this, like, he started writing Dracula, the actual book, when he was 43. He started researching vampires back when he was a teenager. We found notes all the way back to when he was 16 years old that he had made in some books at Marsh's Library in Dublin. But he had actually found, and this is what I thought was cool, like, almost every culture on the planet has a vampire legend or lore in their culture. And a lot of those existed long before we hopped into boats and actually started talking to each other. And his general thinking was that means there is some truth to all of it. Like, it may not necessarily be a vampire, but there is something like that inspired that throughout history. He was so into it, he actually had himself cremated when he died, just to protect his immortal soul from vampires at a time in history when people didn't get cremated. So I think it goes back almost to the beginning of time. And I think if you trace back any of these, werewolves, vampires, ghosts, whatever it might be, you're going to find them in literally every culture around the planet, which is probably the most fascinating piece of that. Like, what is it all actually based on? Because it's based on something.
Sure, sure. Well, it's so interesting too, right? Because it's like pyramids, flood myths. There's certain things that just like go, people in America have, flood myths and vampires and things, and, other parts of the world. And you're like, why? Like, it feels like there was some connection or some truth to it. So
what was I going to say? Oh, like we as people, I think we like to think that we have all of these answers, but the truth is, like, humans have only been around for around 400,000 years, and this planet is billions of years old. Like, for all we know, like, people have been here and gone and come, back again over and over again. It's like we have no clue where any of this stuff comes from.
Right. Yeah. Amen. Okay, so can you count to 3 like a vampire?
Okay, count. What's his name from Sesame Street just popped into my head?
The Count. Yeah.
Yeah, the Count. No, how would you do it as a vampire?
He would always do it 1, 2, 3.
There you go.
And then the last one here for the vampire trivia. How did Vlad Tepes use psychological warfare to scare his enemies? So I think mostly the Ottoman Empire, I think in specific for this one.
So he used to impale people on posts. That was his go-to, and I'm pretty sure that would frighten them, just about anybody who came up. Like, if that army's doing that, I think we'll go and invade this country instead. It definitely bought them a little time. Yeah, the thing is, though, like, a lot of people think that Vlad Dracula was the basis of Dracula, and he's actually not. Dracula is that it actually means devil. And that was like what Bram actually honed in on, that particular word. And then it later became like the original, like, Dracula was originally called Count Vampire in the book, which is not scary sounding. And then there's an actual page in the manuscript where he crossed out Count Vampire and wrote Dracula next to it over and over and over again. So like it evolved over time.
Sure. Very good. Awesome. And so, we mentioned earlier in your career, so moving on from the vampire, trivia here, but we mentioned you interviewed people earlier in your career. So I wanted to ask you, what's the worst question you have ever been asked in an interview, and what should I have asked instead?
Well, you haven't asked any bad questions. What should you ask instead? I don't know if there's a right answer to that either. I get so many of the same questions over and over again. Like, to me, that gets old. But then I tried to think back, what we had mentioned about the rock stars and the bands, like they have to perform that same song over and over again. I try to tell myself that, every time I get up on stage, it may not be my first time, explaining that particular story, but it's the first time the people in the audience are actually hearing it. So I try to keep that in mind all the time.
Very good. Very good. Where's your happy place?
There's probably 2. I mean, that desk behind me, I'm sitting down there, it's comfortable. It's where I create all this stuff. And like, this office kind of evolved over time. I mean, like, I've had writing rooms at home that, started off as closets, and I just threw a desk and a chair in there. I finally feel like I've got a legit office. And number 2 is probably just sitting on the couch with my wife and daughter.
Very good. What's the biggest risk you've ever taken?
Oh, I've taken a bunch of. I'm a firm believer in just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and just sort of what stick. Yeah, I tell the time, like, if you're indoor, you're at, let's say, Thriller Fest, and Lee Child gets in the elevator with you, and you're an author, you've got 15 seconds where you can, either talk to him, you get to know him, ask him, if he'll blurb your book, whatever it might be. Those doors are going to open. He's going to walk away, and he's gone. So, like, if you don't take advantage of that particular moment in time, it's going to slip away. I've gotten very good at taking advantage of those moments in time when they present themselves before they get a chance to slip away. I would rather fall on my face and make a mistake than not ask the question and not try.
And then last one here for our shots portion. Fact or crap, podcasts have officially peaked on this podcast at precisely this moment.
I love podcasts. Like I do one every week called Writers Inc. We interview a lot of the big name celebrities. I enjoy, like, I've got 3 other co-hosts that want me to just sit on there and talk. We're blood that blacks listen to these things, but I like them. It's unfiltered. Like I almost prefer this format now. It's funny because, like when Blair Witch came out, like that shaky cam and all that stuff, like That was hard to stomach. Now that almost feels like the norm when you're watching video. And like, I feel like, podcasts, like that's where I actually get my true information from, because if it's on network television, it's edited, it's scripted, like it just it seems so fake at this point. Like I don't buy or believe any of it. So like, I don't think podcasts are going anywhere. I think they're going to continue to grow.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Amen. It's so funny. It's almost like they thought radio was going to go away. Right. We're like, oh, no one's going to listen to radio, talk radio. It's all going to die. And then really it's just morphed into podcasts, over time. That's where you get to sit and actually hear someone unfiltered for whatever length of time. I think they're great. So awesome. Thanks for that.
Yeah. I'll be right with you. Oh, hello. Fancy meeting you here on the show I host and edit. William R. Hincy. I'm taking a break from my hosting gig at Writers Week of Whiskey to look oh so stylish and oh so suave in my fire mood glasses. As you guessed it, that is today's sponsor. If you'd like to get a 50% off already affordable glasses with tons of selection, you can use the promo code maybe here if you're on the YouTube box and you see my hands. If you're listening on a podcast, you can find it in the description. So check out the link, get your 50% off, support the show, and support restocking the bar behind me, because it is an expensive chore to keep that puppy up. Thanks, everyone. And as we used to say in the 80s, back to your regularly scheduled programming.
In the sake of time here and in, docking the ship that we're supposed to be on time, I like to say it's last call. You don't have to go, but you'll have to restart the video. What I like to ask to kind of end the show here is, what's something you've gained from reading, writing that you don't think you would have gained otherwise?
I mentioned Stephen King a couple of times. I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I get ARC copies of his books. And like when I get them, I will read through them first as a fan. And then I open it back up from page 1 and I go through as an author. I've got the highlighter out. I'm underlining stuff. Like, how did he introduce this character? He's really good at introducing people and building them. In 2 or 3 sentences, he can build a complete person. So I study all of that. I'm a huge Thomas Harris fan for a lot of the same reasons. You can go through a Thomas Harris book. You can strip out everything other than the dialogue, and you still know that Hannibal Lecter said this particular line. Gets written in a way where it came to that person. I studied it as well. And this goes way back. I used to do the same thing with Charles Dickens. I think that's why Great Expectations is one of my all-time favorite books.
Very good. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. And so if people want to learn more about you, I can certainly point them to the website. Is there anywhere else you'd like to direct folks?
Yeah, jdbarker.com is the easiest place to find me. I'm on all the social media apps at JD Barker, or your local bookstore. I've got books in pretty much every one.
Awesome. Well, thank you. It was a real pleasure meeting you. Thanks again for coming on, and you have a great Monday. Extra shot. Question for the community: what is your favorite horror novel? Is it Dracula? Is it something from Stephen King? Is it something from Mr. Barker that we just had on? Let me know down there in the comment section. I'll let you know mine. And very exciting news for the show. We now have a members only section. So if you'd like to go on, I post all the guests early so you can submit questions you might want to ask them. We will eventually be moving to live on the members section, and then we'll edit and pop it onto the YouTube for everyone else from there. If you don't want to do member section, you can actually go to my website, so williamrhincy.com, and you join the speakeasy there, because again, we keep everything liquor themed. Go to the speakeasy there and you get all the shows early, and with lots of shows that aren't even released in the member section on YouTube yet. So we won't be able to ask all the questions and things on there, but you will be able to get the shows and spend nothing. It's just the email address to pop in. So, and I never use the email list. So I'm building this vast email list that's not being used, and I'm not very clever. But like I always say, the very best way to support the show is to buy a book. So I'll include links to JD's catalog, to my catalog on there. If you would support a book, we would certainly appreciate that. It is why we do all of these things, around it. So that is truly the very best way, from the bottom of my, kind of alcohol shriveled heart. So thanks so much for everything. You guys have a great day. Stay saucy, and cheers, everybody.